right, I think we've got a pretty good one today. I think this will be a fun one to talk about. If you've been following along, or if you follow me on Twitter, a lot of different people in the Dynasty community on Twitter, or just the draft community on Twitter, you may have noticed that we started a community mock draft last night. I think from the time that I'm recording this, and probably the time this comes out, it'll have been last night. About a week before the draft starts. And it's a bunch of different people who are knowledgeable in the draft in different ways that are selecting for specific teams to go through the full draft. And we got through the first round plus a little bit into the second round in night one. So I'm assuming this thing will wrap up pretty soon at the rate we've been going, which is awesome. But what I'm not going to do today is sit here and analyze every single pick from a perspective of was this a good pick or not? Because this is a Dynasty fantasy basketball podcast first and foremost. So what we're going to do is take the picks that have happened and talk about what it means for those players in fantasy basketball, because that's what we're here to do. We're here to talk about fantasy basketball, the impact that has. So on draft night or after draft night, it almost would be a waste of we'll call it a waste of time for us to say, ooh, didn't like that pick from that team because, well, they made it. So now we need to see what does this mean for us as dynasty managers. So sure, I guess some of these picks aren't ones that I would have particularly made, but there are a lot of people in this mock that follow the draft from a different perspective than I do, or have different intel that I do, actually have intel unlike I do or don't. So they have their reasons, and it would be awesome to have 25 plus people on a show so everybody can give their exact thoughts on why they made their pick. But obviously, like, that's just not going to happen. So we're just going to talk about what those picks were. Maybe I'll give a thought or two about if I really like the fit or not. And then we'll talk about what it means for fantasy basketball. And a lot of that does end up going together. But certain players that maybe I like, but where they ended up going, I'm fine with because I think they're a good player. But maybe it's not the optimal situation for them for fantasy basketball. Or maybe it's a player that maybe I'm not super high on, but in this situation, I think they'll actually be able to make a pretty good impact. So we'll see exactly how that goes. We're just going to talk about the first round. Not going to go through all 59 picks. One, because they're not all done. And two, just to keep things manageable for time, we're not going to do 2-hour episodes. It's just not going to happen. I'm so sorry. But before we start talking about that, I just want to remind you guys that BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all your sports betting action. We've got baseball season in full swing. We're deep into the NBA finals, and BetOnline has more ways to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news and scores, and even live in-game betting while the games are being played. Of course, we have Game 6 tonight. Tyrese Halliburton's considered a game-time decision despite all of the random clickbait aggregation reports. Everything that's indicating is that he may or may not play and will be a game-time decision, which is why the Thunder are favored by 6.5 points, in Game 6 in Indiana, and are very heavy favorites in this series because it's unclear if Tyrese Halliburton is going to play. And even if Indiana manages to pull off a miraculous win without Tyrese Halliburton, or even with an injured Tyrese Halliburton, winning Game 7 in OKC is going to be a pretty tall task. But it's been an awesome NBA Finals. It's not too late to get in on the action. You can even wait until the game starts. And if you want a live bet, that's a great option you can utilize BetOnline to do. And we also keep the dog days of summer rolling with the largest selection of odds on everything, with updated odds on the MLB, to UFC and boxing, to tennis and NFL futures. BetOnline remains the best online source for all your sports wagering info. And then in between the games, you can head over to the BetOnline casino with all the top Vegas-style games, including poker and a live casino. BetOnline, the game starts here. Okay, so the way we're going to do this is these are going to be quick hit thoughts. I'm not going to spend 5 minutes on each pick because, again, this isn't going to be a 2-hour episode. But I'm just going to have Fanspo pulled up here. I have the spreadsheet with the picks in front of me as well, and who made the picks. So hopefully I'll be able to pronounce everyone's name, at least say their Twitter name, to shout everyone out, because I have some people was just meeting for the first time, or quote unquote meeting for the first time. So I don't know how to pronounce names. Don't know names, but cool. Maybe I'll just do Twitter handles. Anyways, so we're not going to spend time on Cooper Flag. We didn't even have anyone draft him. It was just such an obvious pick that it was boom, Cooper Flag. Yeah, really excited to see what he can do in Dallas with no Kyrie Irving early on, seeing him as ball handler. That's all I'm going to say. We've talked about Cooper Flag a lot, and we'll continue to talk about him. The next pick was made by friend of the show, frequent guest, weekly co-host, whatever you want to call him, Matt Lawson. Dynasty GOAT, you can call him that too. Which obviously you can find him at NBA Dynasty ADP on Twitter. He selected Dylan Harper for San Antonio, which I think is a pretty obvious pick, as in the sense that it's probably going to happen, and it's going to be an interesting fit in year one. Now, long term, I'm not too concerned about where he lands, because no matter what, I think he's going to be effective. But year one, he's going to be, barring other roster changes, competing or sharing touches with De'Aaron Fox, with Stephon Castle. And then still at the same time, you obviously need to get Victor Wembanyama his touches. They could make another trade to bring in another high-level player, whoever that may be, that needs his touches. Devin Vassell's still there and is a high-level scorer. So Dylan Harper may not be the most productive rookie. I think he'll be a good player, but he may not have the best rookie season for fantasy basketball, simply because he wouldn't step into being the best point guard on the team with De'Aaron Fox there. Maybe he starts, but in an off-ball role, how effective is he going to be? So long-term, I like it. Short-term, it's probably not going to be phenomenal next season, and I don't think that anyone should take that as, oh, this was the wrong pick, because I just don't think that's the case. Next up, Josh from Point Made Basketball, which you can find them at Point Made B-Ball on Twitter, was selecting for the 76ers, and he went with Ace Bailey. Now, every recent report is that Ace Bailey canceled his workout. I believe it was Jonathan Gavoni from ESPN that reported that initially. Canceled his workout with the 76ers for Friday. It's been a strange situation about him reportedly not working out for any team at this point. He's a talented player, and I don't think that that'll necessarily change the evaluation of him as a player. But maybe there are some teams that are concerned about him not coming in for a workout. We'll see. But if he does end up in Philadelphia, he's probably not going to start unless that ends up being some sort of thing they work out where he does end up starting. But I would imagine that he's in a reserve role. He'd be joining a team that has multiple high-level scorers, and everything that you read or even watch him play is that you can just tell he wants to be the focal point of the offense. But that wouldn't happen in Philadelphia. So would he be willing to take a little bit of a back seat, play an off-ball role or a 3-and-D role as he develops early on to be able to contribute to winning in year one? So the fit for Philadelphia, while I do think it makes sense as a pick, I don't think it's the optimal situation for him to be productive in year one. But long-term, I don't hate it, because as the Joel Embiid and Paul George regime moves on eventually, whether it's because of injury or because of age, they would have a nice core with Tyrese Maxey, Jared McCain, Quentin Grimes, Ace Bailey, whoever else they're able to add to that. And Ace Bailey would be, assuming he continues to develop, a high-level scorer in that situation. So I don't hate that, but I don't love it year one. I don't think it's an optimal situation for him in year one. All right, next up, we had NBA prospecting at NBA_prospecting on Twitter. Went with VJ Edgecombe for Charlotte. I do like this fit. I do think it's a good one for year one, because then you'd pretty much immediately fill out a starting five in Charlotte that consists of LaMelo Ball, VJ Edgecombe, Brandon Miller, Miles Bridges, Mark Williams. It's a strong starting five. It's a strong, young starting five. Obviously, the caveat there for Charlotte, which it feels like it's been the same caveat for years, is that can everyone stay healthy? But I do think Edgecombe fits in well with this team. He can defend. He's a high-level athlete, can knock down shots. He wasn't a great shooter in college, but he doesn't need to be a high-level shooter, but he can shoot the basketball at least decently. But I think having him as a point-of-attack defender helps make up for LaMelo Ball's lack of on-ball defense. So I think that would be a good fit there for the team and for fantasy basketball. Like I would imagine he starts immediately and he gets shots and he gets touches, is a decent passer, can hit some threes, but really it's the steals that we're going to be excited about. He's a good athlete. They got a ton of steals at Baylor, and I think he'd be able to step in for Charlotte, play a ton of minutes, and do the same thing in year one. So he could be one of the better fantasy rookies next year, specifically in category leagues. And then long term, still, like if he's starting from day one, I don't imagine anything changes as long as he continues to develop as a player. Long term, I think it's a good fit, or as good a fit as Charlotte can be for anyone. All right, 5th pick was made by Brian. You can find him at Weirdos or Weirdos 1221. Let me double check this because I want to make sure we get Brian his shout out. Brian Taylor. It is at WERIDOS 1221. And now if you want to check out some high level scouting reports, Brian's been doing these for months. Very in-depth statistical scouting reports on a number of different prospects. You can just scroll back through. He's got his rankings out there. Definitely give him a follow on Twitter. It's high level content. And we're going to have him as well. Oh my gosh, I forgot to do this at the beginning. At Dizzle Dynasty, who organized this whole mock. Can't believe I totally planned to say this at the beginning. Shout out to him. Shout out to them for organizing this, getting everyone together. We're going to have both of them on the show next week before the draft to preview things. We'll talk about everything the day of the draft. So definitely be sure to give them a follow at Dizzle Dynasty and at WERIDOS 1221. Follow both of them on Twitter for really good Dynasty content. And shout out to them for organizing this. Okay, back to what we were talking about. Brian's pick for Utah was Trey Johnson. So I think I do like that fit for Trey Johnson, especially for year one production. The main thing for Utah has been, can they find a star? Can they, they have a number of enticing pieces, but none of them have been super, super convincing that make you say this player is a future all-star, this player is a future this, future that. But if you could throw Trey Johnson into the mix here, he has the upside to be a really good player. Now, will it happen? Will it not? Not entirely sure. We had a good perspective that was, I guess, more of a pessimistic take on Trey Johnson yesterday with the episode with Stone Hansen. Be sure to check that one out. There's a lot of high-level knowledge being spilled there on 6 different prospects, but it was a more of a pessimistic take on Trey Johnson, which I appreciate because generally I'm pretty optimistic about everyone, and I've heard a lot of optimistic takes about Trey Johnson, so it's good to have the other side of things and not as like a hater side of things, but just like maybe we need to pump the brakes a little bit on this guy. With that being said, I think that Trey Johnson, bare minimum, would be a really good, effective shooter in this offense. And if he's able to continue to develop into more, then he could be a high-level scorer in this offense immediately. Utah's an interesting one because I would assume that if they select him at number 5 overall, they're going to make sure to get him as many minutes as possible. But it really is a logjam at a lot of different positions without anyone being clearly better than the other. So it may be a little bit iffy early on for Trey Johnson, but it would be a scenario where if he's playing well, he'll get the minutes. If he's not, then maybe it takes a little longer to figure things out because they have so many recent lottery picks and so many recent first-round picks in this rotation. Overall, I do like it. I think that Utah, Washington, Brooklyn are good scenarios for teams to give players a lot of minutes in year one. Next up, we had Greg, either Finberg or Feinberg. I apologize either way. And you can follow him at Greg. I'm going to go with Feinberg. At Greg, FINBERG on Twitter. Does really good Wizards content. He drafted Jeremiah Fears for Washington, which, if you've been listening to me, you guys know I really like Jeremiah Fears. I don't love Washington as a fit in the sense that there would be competition for minutes early on because, Jordan Poole's still there, barring a change with that. And then Bub Carrington's coming off a really strong rookie year. Now, would love to get Greg on to be able to share his thoughts. So maybe his idea was okay, yeah, Jordan Poole's there for maybe a year. Maybe he gets traded this summer. Maybe he gets traded at the trade deadline. And then maybe Jeremiah Fears and Bub Carrington both splitting on ball touches, but maybe Carrington in more of a shooting guard role. Eventually, assuming Fears pans out and Bub Carrington pans out the way we think he will as well. But I do really like Fears as a player, so I'm happily taking him with the number 6 overall pick, no matter who I am, no matter what team. But he may not play or immediately step into a starting role, which is what I was kind of hoping for after this draft, like where he would end up. And there's pretty limited teams in which that would actually happen. So he'll probably play a reserve role early on, but that does give him a chance to work through a lot of the issues that he's probably going to have as a small point guard entering the league at 18 years old. Efficiency was an issue in college. It's probably going to be an issue early on. So he's not going to be the best fantasy rookie. He may be one of the worst. But we still love the upside here. Hopefully within 2 or 3 years, he's one of the more impactful rookies in this class. So it's not my ideal fit, but I do like it. All right, next up with the number 7 pick, we had Andrew from Angle Fantasy Basketball. Obviously, they were on, him and Mitch were on last week, I think, at Angle Fantasy BB. And Andrew got one of his favorite players, and that's Con Knipple, to add to New Orleans. Now, we talked about this yesterday with Stone. So again, check out that episode because we also talked about Con. There's not going to be a bad fit for Con. Pretty much wherever he gets drafted, you're going to have a vision for, I see how he's going to impact the game from day one and be able to help this team out from day one, no matter where it is. But New Orleans is a good one. It's an interesting one because I think he plays a large role, but I'm not convinced he starts. So maybe it's not my favorite fit, but it's not a bad fit because you're going to have DeJounte Murray. You're going to have CJ McCollum, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson. There's a lot of talent there. Now, obviously, trades can happen this summer. Rosters can change. Maybe Knipple is able to start. But bare minimum, he's playing a rotation role off the bench, like 15, 20 minutes, and eventually will become a solid 2 or maybe 3, depending on the team, but probably a shooting guard in the starting lineup and be really effective in that role. Maybe not the best landing spot for him for fantasy purposes in year 1, just because it would be more limited than some of these other spots in the top 10. But it depends on what other moves New Orleans makes. And he's a talented player. So again, he'll hit some threes in year 1 for sure. But how much he gets the opportunity to do those other things that we think he's capable of doing, maybe a little bit more limited. All right. So next we have DBC Jason. And Jason does high level dynasty analysis. Definitely follow him on Twitter at DBC Jason. He went with Collin Murray-Boyles here for Brooklyn. And I think this is an interesting one because I always imagine when I'm doing mocks that Collin Murray-Boyles is going to go to a team that is more in a win-now situation. And I think that Collin Murray-Boyles is a really good player, and I'm a believer that he's going to be impactful on both ends of the floor at the next level. I'm not saying he's going to develop into a high-level offensive player, but I think between passing and screening, he'll find a way to impact the game and hopefully develop a shot. But defense is going to be really impactful. Now, in Brooklyn, it's an interesting one because, well, we'll get into it, and Jason does make some really good picks to them later on. It's not a win-now situation. But he's going to play a lot, 100% going to play a lot. And if there's a situation for him to develop offensively, it's here. So maybe we see that happen. But bare minimum, he would play a ton in Brooklyn and rack up the defensive stats. So I think if he lands in Brooklyn, I don't even want to say contender for Rookie of the Year. I mean, I think at this point it's basically going to be Cooper Flagg. Like it would take a pretty significant, and that's entirely unfair to say even before the draft, but it would take a pretty significant rookie season from someone else to overtake Cooper Flagg for that. Like it would take either Cooper Flagg not playing enough, or aside from that, I think it would have to be someone being significantly better than Cooper Flagg for narrative purposes. I just think that if it's two players having similar rookie years, I think most people would just give it to Flagg. Anyways, as far as best fantasy rookie, Collin Murray-Boyles would be in contention for it here. This would be a really good situation for him to impact things in year one, and a really good building block for Brooklyn. Now, it's not what I imagine, because to me, I'm like, okay, like let's get a win now team to add this guy, and he'll be a really good rotation player. That's not what happened in our mock. That might be not what happens on draft night, but I really do like this situation for him from a fantasy perspective. All right, next up we had Josh Lloyd at RedRock_bball selecting for his Toronto Raptors, and he went with Collin Murray-Boyles from Duke, and I kind of like it. Toronto, I think it's been a popular landing spot for him. And right now they have a number of pieces. Some are exciting. Some are, depending on how you feel about them, exciting. But right now, the Jakob Poeltl is the starting center, and having Murray-Boyles as a backup, I think, is pretty enticing. And then hopefully he can develop and can continue to develop over the next few years and be an impactful starter within a season or two, maybe. Assuming that they hold on to Poeltl for a little bit, but maybe not super long term, and eventually Murray-Boyles overtakes him. I guess that would be the vision here. And there would be an opportunity, I think, for him to maybe step right into a backup center role, maybe play 20 minutes per game in year one, which if you look at college, he played 21 minutes per game in college. So he was able to give, I think, about 9.6 boards and almost a block and a half in college. And maybe we could see similar production, or maybe a slightly better production in the NBA because of pace. So it'll be interesting. I don't hate this fit. I don't think he would be obviously not able to step into a starting role immediately because of Poeltl, barring a roster change there. So it may not be the best for him for year one production, but I do think this would be a good selection for Toronto, and he would eventually, assuming he pans out, be really productive as their starting center. All right, next up, we've got Mark C. From Sports Ethos at MacAttack145 selecting for Houston. He is a Rockets fan, so he was able to get Kasparis Jakusionis, which I think is an interesting fit. And I'd love to get more of his thoughts on that pick, because Jakusionis is considered a high-level playmaker with a decent shooter, but he's not exactly known for his defense. And Houston has a lot of high-level defenders. They obviously could trade this pick on draft night. They could make this pick. We'll see. But point guard is an interesting situation for Houston. So I don't hate this, even though he doesn't feel like the style of player that Ime Udoka would love, because they have Fred VanVleet, who's aging. Is Reed Shepherd a point guard, or do they really think of him as a shooting guard? Barely got to see him in year one, so maybe we'll get a better answer this next season. But if they view him as more of a shooting guard and that can maybe ball handle a little bit, then having Jakusionis as a backup point guard immediately would actually be a really solid pick here. So my fear here with whoever Houston selects is that if they aren't ready to contribute, they're not going to get the opportunity to. Totally fair. I mean, we just saw that from Reed Shepherd, who went number 3 overall, and he spent most of the year in the G League because he wasn't ready. And that's fine. Like, long-term, it'll be good, but this may not be the best landing spot for anyone, but specifically for a player like Jakusionis, that maybe he doesn't get to play a ton as a rookie. So maybe not the best landing spot for year one, but still would eventually. There isn't another like point guard of the future on this roster. So I do think that would be in his favor. All right, next up we had Mitch from Angle Fantasy Basketball selecting for Portland, and he went with, let's see, okay, I don't have to scroll down far, Cedric Coward, who is an interesting prospect in this class because he has a lot of things to like. He's got defensive production. He's got threes. He's got a 7'2" wingspan, but he only played 6 games last season for Washington State, transferred to Duke before eventually declaring for the draft instead. So the opinions are pretty mixed because he was effective at like before he was at Washington State, I believe it was Eastern Washington he was at, but it was a different school that was lower level, and he was productive there. But it's hard to really translate all this together. So this would be a little bit of a risky pick, but I do like it. And he would fit in with a lot of what Portland has. Overall, just want to see Portland just kind of hand the keys to this next group of players as opposed to continuing to try this 2 timeline thing where both of them are pretty average. But I think having Cedric Howard as a wing defender, as a 3-point floor spacer would be pretty interesting in here. Maybe he's not a starter in year one. Maybe he could eventually become one, but with Denny Avdia and Shaden Sharp there, maybe there's not a great path for him right now. And with Toumani Camara as well. But there would be some pretty interesting lineups that could be used. So maybe he plays a significant reserve role as a rookie and gets to contribute at a high level. So I don't hate it. I don't love it for a fantasy perspective. I think that there would be other situations that would be able to optimize him more, but I do think this would be a good pick for Portland. All right, next up, this is Latif Love selecting for Chicago at Real Latif Love on Twitter, and he went with Thomas Sorber, who I was really hoping was going to slide to me, but didn't, because I really like Sorber. But having him in Chicago as the next center kind of encourages them to slowly or continue to move off Nikola Vucevic, get to a point where Sorber eventually becomes starting center. A really good defender, 7'6" wingspan, can rebound, can pass, a lot of things to like. So would encourage Chicago to move more towards a rebuild. But even if they don't, and for some reason they try and compete for a play-in spot once again next year, having Sorber as a reserve behind Vucevic, I think, is really interesting. And he should play. I mean, they could run them together in lineups at times, see how that fits. But he could play 20 minutes per game as a rookie. And I think that he could get some stocks, get some assists, get some boards, shoot a high field goal percentage. There's a lot of things that he could do in a limited role to contribute in fantasy basketball. So I do like this landing spot, both short-term and even more so long-term. Would be a really good building block for Chicago. All right, I had the next pick at 13 for Atlanta, and while I did consider a couple players here, I guess I'll give a little bit more of my thoughts on my picks, because I think that's fair. I thought about Derik Queen simply in the sense that he had slid a little bit, but I don't love the landing spot in Atlanta. I mean, I wouldn't hate it if he fell to them at 13, and he went. He was kind of the backup center behind Onyeka Okongwu. I think that's pretty interesting, but one of Okongwu's weaknesses is that he is an undersized center, and so having another fairly short forward center as his backup, didn't love, really wanted, and I also felt good about the center options over there at 22. So that's why I didn't go Derik Queen. I thought about Noah Essengate a good bit because I like him, and I have him ranked higher than Carter Bryant, but I ended up going with Carter Bryant. And I don't know if that was like I need to update my rankings or just kind of like I just kind of really like the upside here, and I like what Carter Bryant could maybe be. I don't think he would obviously step into a starting role in year one, but I think having another high-level defender makes things easier on Trae Young. To build around a 6'1" point guard that is a offensive beast, but a defensive liability, who's improved on defense, but still not a strength, obviously. A lot of guys with really long wingspans that play high-level defense around him is a good thing. Adding in Carter Bryant, really excited about. So that's why I went with Carter Bryant, and I think that he would be able to, he'd be able to maybe contribute a little bit in year one in fantasy basketball. I wouldn't be super optimistic, though. I don't think it's a great landing spot for Carter Bryant in fantasy, but I think it's a good pick for the Hawks. And I think that maybe eventually, if he continues to develop, even then, he would have to overtake Zachary Risache or something else would have to happen. So this isn't the ideal landing spot for him for fantasy. And it's not the ideal landing spot for him to eventually become a starter, though it could certainly happen where he overtakes someone or something else happens where there's a trade. Things change so quickly in the NBA. But I would be really happy if the Hawks selected him. All right, next up, it was Matt Lawson back on the clock selecting for the Spurs again, and he was able to get one of his favorite players in this class in Derik Queen. and ended the slide. It was an interesting one because I think that Derik Queen in other situations be able to start from day one and play a ton of minutes, but now he's in San Antonio. Well, this would be a nice value pick for the Spurs to walk with Dylan Harper and Derik Queen. That would be insane. But now Derik Queen is probably the backup center, I imagine. Don't know how much he would play in year one because they're going to give Wemby as many minutes as possible. But we could see some lineups where Derik Queen is on the floor at the same time as Wemby. Maybe whether he's at center or power forward doesn't really matter. Wemby's going to be getting the rebounds, so maybe that limits Derik Queen's like rebound production. But he's a good passer, and they can still utilize him as an offensive hub at times. So I don't think it's a terrible landing spot for him in year one. Long term, I think it's a pretty good landing spot, even if maybe if he continues to develop and maybe he becomes like a starting level NBA player, then he can work in lineups alongside Wemby and still be productive in that way. So I do like that situation for him. Maybe not ideal for year one, but long term, if he's going to be good, like the Spurs will get him on the floor. All right. Next up, we had Hydra and James, I believe, selecting for, or maybe it's Hydra or James, selecting for the Thunder at Outworlder 47. And he went with Nick Clifford, who I think has a chance to be one of the more productive rookies in fantasy basketball this year. But I don't think OKC is the best place to do that. It'd be a really good pick for OKC to just continue to add to their talent pool. But there isn't a ton of opportunity for Nick Clifford to just crack this rotation immediately. And maybe he's just that good that he proves everyone wrong. But we're talking about a team that is in the finals and probably about to win the finals, that also has a first-round pick from last year coming back into the rotation, also has other first-round picks that are barely in the rotation, just sitting there continuing to develop. I mean, I'm having a random thought now. Nick Clifford is, let me see how old he is. 23, born February 9th, 2002. This will be interesting. Let's see. Okay, so Ousmane Dieng, who's been on the Thunder for a number of years, just like a few, is over a full year younger than Nick Clifford. That's pretty interesting. So if Nick Clifford ends up in OKC, maybe he's just more ready to contribute than some of these other teams, and that's fine. Or some of these other prospects, or some of the players that are already on their team, and he's able to crack a rotation. The Thunder are trying to win championships at this point. They're going to continue to develop their guys, but they're trying to win championships. So maybe Nick Clifford contributes to that more than other players in this team, in which case he could play a rotation. But this isn't a great fantasy landing spot short term for anyone, but it would be a solid pick, and he would be able to contribute to the team more so than fantasy basketball, in my opinion. Next up, it was Corey Tulaba from No Ceilings at Corey Tulaba on Twitter. Corey, apologize if I got your last name wrong. Selecting for Memphis, and he went with Jaeger Demon, which I think is an interesting one. It's not a player that I'm very high on, but he would be a nice, probably a reserve for them with some playmaking upside. And obviously, they have John Morant, Scottie Pippen Jr. as point guards. We talked with Stone yesterday about Jaeger Demon. Talked about him potentially playing the wing because he's not super strong and can't create a ton with his handle. So maybe he's more of a wing. I don't think that Memphis is the best spot for him to play a lot in year one. So for fantasy perspective, this isn't maybe the best landing spot for him. Short term, if he develops the way the people that like him and are optimistic about him think he will, then yeah, maybe he eventually is able to be a starter on this team or a high-level rotation player. But I don't think this is the best spot for him in fantasy basketball in the short term. All right, next up, we had Finn Draft at Finn Draft on Twitter. Went with Noah Essengate to Minnesota, which I think would be a home run hit for Minnesota to add a player that I'd probably consider as a lottery talent. to add him at 17 would be awesome. And I think he fits a lot of what they want to do. Good defender, has some things to work on offense, but is able to contribute. Will be able to contribute from day one. And I think that's basically what Minnesota needs. Like they made 2 straight conference finals. Adding another project isn't what they need. And Noah Essengay is young, and he would be, I guess, maybe project isn't the right word, but he does have potential and has a lot of things he has to work on, but he's going to be able to contribute from day one and then has the upside to be a lot more than that. I don't know how great this would be for fantasy basketball, but as we get into some more of these teams that are playoff teams, as we noticed with a couple of the other ones we've already talked about, they're not situations where players are going to step in and play a ton. So wouldn't be ideal in that scenario or for short-term fantasy, but long-term for dynasty, I do like the situation. I think he fits a lot of what they like to do. And if he develops defensively and offensively the way we think he can, maybe he eventually allows this team to stick with a lot of what they have, but he's able to overtake like Julius Randle in the starting lineup. And then they're able to keep at least Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, and Noah Essengay in the starting lineup. Maybe Rob Dillingham has developed at that point too. Figured out center. Maybe it's Naz Reid. Maybe who knows? This would be a few years down the road, but I do like it in that sense. Next up, Greg was back on the clock for Washington, and he went with Asa Newell. I think this would be an opportunity for Asa to obviously play a lot year one in Washington. Having Alex Sarr comfortable playing center, and then having Asa Newell also out there, maybe that allows Sarr to play a little bit more on the perimeter because Newell was a pretty strong post player in college, but also has the ability to space the floor. And I think having Sarr out there would make up for a lot of Newell's weaknesses. So I think they would fit well together. From a fantasy perspective, I do think it's a pretty good situation for him. I mean, they already added Jeremiah Fears, so now you have at least him, Jordan Poole, and Bub Carrington as guards that can feed Asa Newell shots. So I do like that, and he would obviously be able to play a lot in Washington year one. So I think this would be a pretty good landing spot for fantasy basketball purposes. All right, next up, we had Jason back on the clock for Brooklyn, and he went with Jace Richardson. Who is an incredibly talented player and a very, well-rounded, was a productive college player. And obviously the number one question mark is he's kind of small, measured around 6'1". Nice wingspan, nice vertical, nice college production, but he's undersized, and you wouldn't consider him a point guard. But Brooklyn's in a situation where they can figure this out on their own. Like, Brooklyn is a pretty, I don't know, they're a lot of pretty much every other team, in my opinion, has at least one or two players that you would say, okay, this player is a franchise player or has the upside to be. Brooklyn doesn't really have that. They have some talented players that are ready to contribute now. They have some talented players that have upside, but I wouldn't say that they have the guy. I think that's a fair evaluation. Jace Richardson, there's question marks and there's reasons to be pessimistic, but why not get him some ball handling reps? Or if you're Brooklyn, maybe he's not great at this. Maybe this isn't the ideal thing for him. Well, we've gotten him those reps and he's developed, but now we're going to have him in an off-ball role because that's where he's best. So this would be a really good situation. I think no matter who Brooklyn selects, it's going to be a good situation for them for fantasy basketball. So if you're in a dynasty league trying to add someone that has upside but is going to contribute and help your team win in year one, I think that Jace Richardson, whoever Brooklyn selects, but in this case it would be Jace Richardson, is a good selection. All right, next up for Miami, we had Prospect Sauce at Prospect Sauce. Selecting for the Heat, he went with Noah Penda, who, if you remember when we had Nathan Grubel on to talk about Noah Penda, we weren't super optimistic about him as a player. He's a pretty well-rounded guy, but he's not super strong with anything, but a nice connective piece. But I think, again, regardless, like other people are going to be higher on Noah Penda. And that's fine because there's reasons to be optimistic as well. But Miami is, I think, a pretty good landing spot. I think he'd be able to play a lot in year one because I've kind of felt this way about the Heat for a number of years, even though they've remained competitive. But they're having players that probably wouldn't crack rotations on other teams, or maybe would be rotation pieces on other teams, playing heavy minutes and producing. And you see this a lot where like they'll get like an undrafted player and they'll play at a high level or in a contract somewhere else that are not as productive. And we've seen situations where that doesn't hold true. Well, a lot of times players play their best in Miami. So whoever Miami selects here at 20, I think will have a chance to play a lot in year one and overtake some of the guys that are currently on this roster. So I like this spot for Noah Penda for fantasy purposes. Just in the sense that it's going to be a good opportunity for him to play a good bit. All right, next up, we have Brian back on the clock selecting for Utah. And he went with, and if Matt, if you're listening to this, I think I'm going to get this right, but maybe not, Jan Berenjay for France, or from France, as kind of a raw upside center. And I do like that in Utah. Again, even though they have a lot of players at every position, I think just adding the best player available or someone with a ton of upside is a smart thing for them, because they need to figure out superstar. They need to figure out franchise player. And shoot, maybe and this isn't direct comparisons, but maybe they just added Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert in this draft with Trey Johnson and Jan Berenjay. Maybe. Probably not. But he has that upside because you have Walker Kessler there. You have Kyle Filipowski there. But Walker Kessler's been in the league for a few years now. There's been a lot of different trade rumors. This team isn't ready to compete for a championship. Maybe they move on from Walker Kessler, and Kyle Filipowski's solid, but can also be considered a 4/5. Jan Berenjay would have potential to be the starting center of the future. So I don't know. I mean, Utah should be able to get everyone playing time in year one. So I assume this would be a fairly decent spot, but for him as a player, I expect it to maybe take a little bit longer for him to be productive if he's in Utah. If he's on another team where he's able to get minutes and they're more competitive, then maybe he's able to be more productive in year one. But right now, I'm not super optimistic that this would be great year one production, but longer term, I do like the upside there. All right, got a few more picks, a handful more. I was on the clock next for Atlanta again. We added Carter Bryant with the first of Atlanta's 2 first-round selections. And I considered a couple of players here. I thought about Rasheer Fleming because I like him, but I really needed to get a center. So I was between Danny Wolf and Maxime Reynaud. And I went with Reynaud, who has the potential to be the best offensive center in this draft and could be considered the best offensive prospect in this class. And I think that he fits a lot of what Atlanta needs, and Danny Wolf would too. So I would be happy with either of those picks. But I think we finally got a taste last year of Trae Young with a floor spacing center with Onyeka Okongwu. And that was Okongwu just developing into a shooter. I wouldn't he really did improve as a shooter. Now he is a good shooter. But Reynaud as Okongwu's backup, with having a few extra inches than Okongwu does, being over 7 feet, able to space the floor, able to pass, able to rebound, a lot of things that the Hawks would utilize or love to see in a backup center, and also pick and pops with Trae Young. I mean, literally Trae Young had Dwayne Dedmon playing with respect, of course, but as having as a pick and pop threat there, that was phenomenal. And now Okongwu's developing as a shooter, so that works. But having another, I think, pick and pop partner that is a little taller than Okongwu fits really well with what Atlanta wants to do offensively. A lot of players that can shoot, a lot of length, a lot of height, things that make the game easier on Trae Young. So I think having him, apologies to everyone. Everyone in fantasy basketball has been begging for Okongwu to get out of a minute split, and I just put him right back in one. But I think this would be more like, Okongwu would obviously be getting more of the minutes, but maybe like a 30-18 or 28-20, where Okongwu is still productive and still playing at a high level. And maybe it's even 32-16. But we have a backup center in Atlanta. And right now, pre-free agency, that's a need for the Hawks. So he'd be immediately able to step in and fill that role. And it wouldn't be playing a ton of minutes, but enough for him to produce a little bit. But not great for fantasy basketball in the short term, maybe more so in the long term. All right, next up, we had Andrew back up on the clock for New Orleans with the pick they acquired from Indiana recently. And he went with Nolan Traore, who would add more point guard depth. And I know when they had a million injuries last year, that was an issue, where they were like literally had Alfred Payton off a 10-day or whatever it was coming in and starting. DeJounte Murray is healthy, I think. No reason for him. Or maybe he won't even be healthy this season. I don't know if there's been an official update on that. But DeJounte Murray should be back at some point. Jose Alvarado's there. CJ McCollum's there. So maybe this isn't the best spot for Traore in year one. But I think more long-term, I don't hate it. And I think it kind of depends on what other moves New Orleans makes. If they do shift more towards a rebuild, then maybe they get more minutes for a solid playmaker, a strong finisher at point guard. So, but probably not the best in year one. But long term, I don't hate it. I kind of like it. All right, next up for OKC, back on the clock was James at Outworlder 47, and he went with Danny Wolf, who would be a pretty interesting pick. I don't think, again, pretty similarly to the last OKC pick with Nate Clifford, I don't think he would play a ton, but it doesn't really matter who they select here. That player's not going to play a ton in year one. But Danny Wolf would be an interesting piece for OKC to add, because you would have obviously Chet Holmgren and Isaiah Hartenstein for at least a couple more years, and then maybe eventually you let Hartenstein walk or you trade him and have Danny Wolf kind of fill that role where he's playing 20 to 25 minutes per game. So not a great landing spot in year one, but long-term, if he develops, OKC will find minutes for him, and he'll be playing on a really, really good team, which will make things a little easier for him. All right, next up we had Dynasty Hoops HQ. Dynasty Hoops HQ making his first pick, and Orlando obviously would have had the number 16 pick, so this would have been his second one, but it will be his first one. And he opted to go with a center for Orlando, and he went with Ryan Kalkbrenner from Creighton, an older prospect who should step in on Orlando and probably be a reserve, but a tall backup center, which would be really nice. Because Wendell Carter is a little bit undersized, and they have Goga Batadze and I believe Mo Wagner. Let me double check their contract situation to make sure none of these guys are free agents, because for some reason now I'm thinking one of them might be. Mo Wagner has a team option for this season. That's what I'm thinking about. So at least two centers, maybe Wagner as a third, but maybe they select Kalkbrenner and opt to let Wagner walk. Orlando's center situation has been iffy because they're a bunch of solid players, but none of them is significantly better than the rest. So Kalkbrenner would, I think, be able to at least compete to step in and play a large role early on. If he's able to just earn the spot, he's able to just earn the spot. Regardless, the center position in Orlando isn't strong enough for me to say, no matter who they select at center, even if they do, that player wouldn't be able to step in and play a large role early on, because I think it could happen for sure. So I do like this situation. Short term, I'm not as high on Kalkbrenner, but like I see the reason to like him. So taking him in the first round would, if Orlando does, then you're like, oh, okay, maybe they do like him a good bit and want him to play over Batadze or split the minutes at center. We'll see. There's definitely a path for that to be a really good pick in year one. All right. Jason has the next two picks for Brooklyn. And he went with, I'm just going to talk about both of them at the same time. He went with Walter Clayton Jr. and Adu Tiero. Again, I said this on previous episodes. When I get an official pronunciation guide, I will be much better. I apologize. But like I said, with Brooklyn, they have pretty clean slate as far as who they can select. So they've already added Collin Murray-Boyles as a 4, Jace Richardson as a 1 or a 2, Walter Clayton Jr. as a 1, and then Tiero as, I guess, like a 3. I would say a 3. So a number of players that whether they start or not are going to come in and be able to have the chance to play a lot in year 1. I think it'd be a really interesting spot for Walter Clayton Jr. specifically for him to make a run at like all rookie first team, because we know he can be a really productive player. He just led Florida to a national championship. So I think that'd be a pretty interesting spot for both these guys, but specifically for Walter Clayton Jr. to be really productive in year 1 and then just continue to be productive. Like we talk a lot about, and we like in Dynasty, players that are 18, 19, 20 years old for the upside. But if Walter Clayton Jr. is able to step in and be a starter from day 1 and just maintain that position because he is playing really well, it's a really good landing spot. All right, next up, Tyler Rucker, friend of the show from No Ceilings, selected for Boston. And he went with Rasheer Fleming, which would be such a freaking steal for Boston to be able to add a player with a 7'5" wingspan that can hit the 3 and get defensive stats. Would be really interesting depending on the moves Boston makes, because I think he would be able to play a large role in year 1 with no Jason Tatum. Would be pretty scary, unfair, stupid for Boston to be able to add someone 28 that would step in and contribute from day 1. Now, if they do make other moves, maybe that opens up even more minutes for him. So we'll see who Boston selects here. If it is Fleming or another player that I like, then I'd be pretty optimistic about how they produce and contribute in year 1. But definitely like the landing spot here for Fleming, because even after Tatum's back, having a player that can contribute on both ends of the floor like Fleming would like the selection. All right, next up we had Rhett Bauer selecting for Phoenix, because I'm sure he would have loved to have selected for Indiana, but they traded their pick, sadly. So he selected for Phoenix and went with Liam McNeely. Would be an interesting one. A lot of it would come down to what this Phoenix roster looks like next year. I could see McNeely playing a reserve role. If there is a chance for him to be better than significantly better than he was in college and back to being the high level prospect that he was in high school, Phoenix is a pretty good landing spot for him to do that. Again, I think a lot of the players that could go in this range, just like with Boston, but maybe even more so in Phoenix, would have a chance to play a ton in year 1. But it really depends on what Phoenix gets back in the Kevin Durant trade. They didn't have a ton of depth last year, and I don't think unless they get like 5 prospects or 4 prospects back in the Kevin Durant trade, which I don't see happening, this player is going to get a chance to play a good bit. I don't think that Liam McNeely has a strong fantasy game. I think he'll be able to hit some threes, but I don't know how much else he's going to contribute. So it's a good landing spot, but I'm not optimistic about him as a player in fantasy. All right, to wrap up the first round, we had Stan Sun at Stan_Sun. And Rhett's Twitter, I don't think I said, maybe I didn't say Tyler's either, at Tyler Rucker, at Rhett_Bauer, and at Stan_Sun. Very easy to remember some of these. Went with one of my favorite players in the draft, and Drake Powell to the Clippers. And I will have, hopefully we can get at least most of the draft on this board. Close to it. But he went with Drake Powell to the Clippers. Really like that fit. I think a number of the teams at the end of the draft, Drake Powell would fit really well. End of the first round of the draft to come in and contribute defensively in year 1, and maybe over the years develop on offense. But the Clippers don't have a lot of youth on this team, don't have a lot of upside for the future. Drake Powell would provide them with that, but also be able to contribute in year 1 as a defender for a team that's probably hoping to be a little better in the playoffs next year. So I would like that spot for Drake Powell, but I also am pretty high on him as a player and expect him to be able to crack a rotation in year 1. And if you're not as optimistic about him, maybe you don't like the landing spot as much. But that's going to do it. So this community mock will continue until it wraps up, and you can follow along on Twitter. I think everyone is kind of giving their thoughts, or at least some of the people are giving their thoughts on their picks. I was drafting for the Hawks and went with Carter Bryant and Maxime Reynaud. Would be a home run hit, in my opinion. But there's a couple other players that could get at either of those spots that I would like as well. But continue to follow along. Again, shout out to at Dizzle Dynasty and at I'm just gonna say Weirdos 1221, but it's Weirdos 1221. And I apologize, Brian. I'm gonna have to ask you about your Twitter when you get on here. But definitely give them a follow for high level content, and shout out to them for organizing this community mock. That's going to do it for this episode of the Young Man Squad Fantasy Basketball Podcast. We talked about a mock that included a lot of different people and talked about the fantasy impact of that. Also, make sure you've checked out the last few episodes we've done. I know we had Stone Hansen on yesterday to talk about a handful of prospects, and Matt Lawson joined the day before to talk about his rookie rankings. Check out those as well. You can like, you can comment, subscribe. Follow me on Twitter at NoRuben22. Nope, this side. Let me see if I can get my fingers, if you're watching this, to be able to. There we go. It's like reverse camera angle, so it's kind of hard. Cool. And you can ask me any dynasty-related questions. If you want to see anything on this show, any tops covered, any players in particular covered, any questions you have, dynasty questions, rookie draft questions, anything at all, you can send me a tweet. Just tag me in it. Tell me what you want to see. Would love thoughts and opinions on what we should cover. But that's going to do it for this episode, and I will see you guys next time.